They say the town of Mills Hollow was swallowed whole. Not by fire, not by flood, but by silence. In the winter of 1891, newspapers briefly whispered about a traveling exhibition that arrived in the Pennsylvania hills, calling itself the Temple of Marvels. The poster promised wonders never before seen: giants, ghouls, and angels in flesh. But within weeks, the carnival vanished. Only one story survived, tucked in the margins of a forgotten diary. It spoke of a cellar beneath the show tents, a basement of stone, and 17 chained performers, skeletal and blind from years without sunlight. No police record, no trial, no follow-up. Just a note in shaky ink. They were not born that way. They were made. To understand Mills Hollow, you must first understand its soil. The town was built upon limestone caverns, ancient fissures that once served as burial grounds for a Lenape tribe driven into exile. Locals whispered that the ground itself was hungry. The first settlers complained of livestock wandering into the woods, returning weeks later gaunt, scarred, and wrong. By the 1880s, the land had grown notorious for its inexplicable disappearances. Families came, then families left. The church bells rang less often. And when the freak show arrived that autumn, its grotesque promise of entertainment felt, to some, like a reflection of the town itself. Eyewitness accounts described the carnival as uncanny, even before its secret was uncovered. Children claimed the animals never blinked. A preacher swore the sideshow banners shifted overnight, the painted eyes of the attractions moving subtly, watching him. The main tent smelled not of sawdust and popcorn, but of rust, mildew, and rot. Some townsfolk left disturbed after seeing the performers. Men with faces sewn into permanent grins, women whose limbs bent the wrong way. Others stayed, unable to look away. But the most unsettling detail, repeated across letters and sermons, was the sound. From beneath the boards of the stage, faint hammering, as if something below was building its own prison. In November of 1891, Reverend Thomas Bell of the Mills Hollow First Presbyterian began warning his congregation that the carnival was an ark of the damned. He described the performers as not accidents of birth, but experiments of cruelty. His sermons were met with nervous silence. Some believed he was exaggerating, but a quiet unease spread through the pews. The town was already fractured. Mill closures had thrown many into poverty, and whispers of children gone missing hung like smoke over the valley. Yet no one wanted to confront the carnival directly. It was easier to avert the eyes, to keep paying 2 pennies to marvel at the grotesque. Denial was cheaper than truth. One night, a farmhand named Joseph Kern wandered behind the tents after drinking. He later told his brother that he heard weeping from below the main stage. Not the theatrical cries of a performance, but guttural, fractured sobs. He bent down and pressed his ear against the dirt. There, beneath the carnival, was the unmistakable rattle of chains. When he tried to tell the sheriff, he was dismissed. Drunken imagination, hallucination. But 2 days later, Kern disappeared. His boots were found near the river, toes pointed toward the water, laces torn as if by frantic hands. His body was never recovered. The diary of schoolteacher Margaret Ives is the most complete surviving record. In a brittle entry dated November 19th, she wrote, "The carnival folk are not performers. They are captives. I saw a boy with nails driven through his feet so he could not run. I saw a girl with her mouth sewn shut. When I cried out, one of the men in charge put a finger to his lips and smiled." She never showed this entry publicly. It was discovered decades later, tucked into the false back of her writing desk. Ives herself disappeared 3 weeks after that entry. Her schoolhouse was left vacant. Her chalkboard still bore half an arithmetic lesson. Rumors of the basement grew louder. Townsfolk began to notice carriages arriving at night, covered in black tarps. They would enter the carnival grounds but never emerge. A midwife claimed she saw one of the performers chained in the back of a wagon, thrashing against restraints. The carnival barkers explained it away, practice for an upcoming act. But beneath the explanation was the unmistakable stench of ammonia, blood, and lime. Something was being concealed. By late November, Reverend Bell had gathered a small band of men to investigate. They armed themselves with lanterns and rifles. They walked into the carnival at dusk. None of them returned. December came and the carnival was gone. No wagons. No tents. No footprints in the frost. The land where it stood was churned mud, frozen into jagged ridges. The church bells rang once more that week, and then were silent forever. By Christmas, nearly 40 townsfolk had vanished. The rest scattered, abandoning Mills Hollow to the snow. The county records make only a passing note. Population declined sharply. Reasons uncertain. But in the cellar of the old Presbyterian church, archivists later found 17 iron shackles embedded in the stone. The walls were clawed with fingernail marks, some still bloody despite the passing decades. By the early 1900s, Mills Hollow had become a ghost town. Travelers reported collapsed roofs, hollow houses, and the echo of church bells though no bell remained. The carnival was never seen again, yet rumors spread across Pennsylvania of similar exhibitions. Shows that arrived unannounced, promised miracles, then dissolved without a trace. The name Temple of Marvels vanished, replaced by subtler titles. The Wonder Cabinet, the Eden Menagerie. Each bore the same symbol on its posters. An eye within a circle, encircled by barbed rays. No scholar has traced the emblem to any known tradition. Some believe it was not a logo, but a warning. In 1923, a reporter named Charles Harlan stumbled on Margaret Ives's hidden diary while cataloging abandoned belongings for the County Historical Society. Harlan became obsessed. He followed every clue, traveling to surrounding towns in search of anyone who remembered the freak show. One elderly woman, nearly blind, told him she had once seen the chained girl with her mouth sewn shut. Harlan pressed for details, but she grew hysterical and refused to speak further. Weeks later, Harlan's notes end abruptly. His typewriter still held a half-written sentence. "They are not." No one ever saw him again. By the time the Great Depression struck, whispers of Mills Hollow were dismissed as folklore. Yet the physical evidence remained. Shackles in the church cellar, claw marks in the stone. Some of these relics were transported to the University of Pennsylvania for study. Records show the shackles were made from pig iron, brittle and crude, but strangely reinforced with fragments of human bone. Laboratory notes describe the material as an alloy that resists explanation. The claw marks were preserved as plaster casts. Beneath the scratches, analysts discovered something more unsettling. Geometric carvings etched into the stone, patterns resembling suns collapsing into darkness. Local priests interpreted the symbols as demonic. Historians dismissed them as pranks. But the carvings had a quality no one could explain. They seemed to move. Scholars wrote of tracing the lines with their fingers only to find them subtly rearranged days later, as if alive. The plaster casts cracked without reason. Photographs taken of the symbols often returned blurred, even when the rest of the image was clear. Some archivists swore the symbols hummed faintly in the dark, like distant singing. Eventually, the university sealed the evidence in crates marked not for public display. Those crates were locked away in 1931. Officially, they were lost in storage. In 1934, an orphanage in Allentown reported a strange event. Children swore a traveling show had passed through town, though no adults admitted seeing it. The children described figures in masks who handed out small wooden tokens carved with the same circular eye. Days later, 3 children vanished from their dormitory beds. The matron insisted they had run away. But when investigators searched the grounds, they found faint chains buried in the soil beneath the orphanage, identical in design to those recovered from Mills Hollow. The report was buried under the chaos of the Depression. The tokens were confiscated and quietly vanished into state archives. By the late 1930s, a handful of academics began to notice a pattern. Wherever the Marvel shows appeared, disappearances followed. Families dissolved, towns emptied. But documentation was always scarce. Newspapers ran 1 or 2 lines, then fell silent. One professor, Elias Caldwell, theorized that the shows were not entertainments at all but mobile prisons. He suggested the performers were taken from orphanages, asylums, or poorhouses, reshaped through cruelty, then paraded as curiosities. His colleagues laughed at him until Caldwell produced a set of photographs showing emaciated figures chained in what appeared to be a stone basement. The negatives were confiscated days later. Caldwell was committed to an asylum soon after. What remains of Caldwell's testimony is chilling. He wrote that the performers were unfinished. Their bodies altered not for spectacle but for ritual. They are vessels, his notes read, hollowed out for something older than flesh. He believed the freak shows were not run by men, but by an order of caretakers, descendants of those who once buried their dead in the limestone caverns beneath Pennsylvania soil. In his final coherent letter, Caldwell wrote, "It is not cruelty. It is cultivation. They are planting something inside the bodies." He was found days later with his tongue cut out, a sharpened spoon in his hand. The asylum ruled it suicide. World War II distracted the country, but the shows never ceased. In 1944, a small mining town in West Virginia reported a carnival that appeared overnight. Within a week, the mine collapsed, sealing dozens underground. Survivors swore they heard laughter in the dark. Not the laughter of men, but high, fractured voices like broken instruments. Afterward, locals discovered a narrow shaft leading to a chamber beneath the carnival grounds. Inside were rusted shackles and bones filed to points. No official record survives. The shaft was filled with concrete, the town evacuated. But veterans passing through remembered the symbol on the posters. The same eye, always the eye. By 1947, the freak shows had nearly disappeared from public memory. Traveling carnivals still crisscrossed America, but the Temple of Marvels and its successors were gone, leaving only fragments of rumor. That year, however, two hunters stumbled into the ruins of Mills Hollow. They followed the sound of what they thought were bells, though the church had collapsed decades earlier. In the cellar, beneath the rubble, they found the same 17 shackles embedded in stone. But this time, the chains were warm to the touch. One of the hunters claimed he heard a whisper when he pressed his ear to the wall. A child's voice, repeating the words, "Still here." The hunters carried one of the shackles to a state museum in Harrisburg. Within weeks, the artifact was quietly removed from display. The museum's curator resigned abruptly, leaving behind a letter smeared with ash. "They are not bound by iron. They are bound by attention. Do not look too long." The shackle itself vanished into government storage. Some say it was transported to Washington. Others insist it never left Harrisburg, that it was buried beneath the museum foundation, sealed with concrete and prayer. But visitors to the basement gallery began to complain of hearing footsteps behind them, even when alone. The gallery was eventually closed. By 1950, only the oldest townsfolk remembered Mills Hollow. The government dismissed it as folklore, a lost settlement no different from 100 others across the state. But the pattern lingered. Every decade, a cluster of disappearances. Orphanages with missing children. Churches that closed their doors overnight. Newspapers that ran strange headlines only to retract them. Always in the margins, the same symbol appeared. Etched into doors, painted onto rocks, scribbled in the corners of forgotten books. The circle, the eye, the barbed rays. It was no longer just a sign of the freak shows. It had become a mark of possession. And so we return to the question no one wants to ask. What was really chained in that basement in 1891? 17 broken performers or 17 vessels, prepared for something older than flesh? The silence of Mills Hollow answers for us. Towns collapse. Records vanish. Voices go missing. And still, in basements across America, the walls bear claw marks that never fade. Some call it myth. Others call it madness. But if you ever hear faint laughter beneath your feet, laughter that does not belong to any living throat, remember Mills Hollow. And remember that some doors, once opened, will never close again.